Hello all and welcome to the 7th webinar in our course, Water Addressing the Global Crisis. Today's topic is food and water, and with us we have Professor Jan Lundqvist, Senior Advisor at Stockholm International Water Institute. So let's all welcome Professor Jan Lundqvist to our session.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Yes, it's good morning and maybe good afternoon or even good evening to some of you. I heard from Alexandra that we have participants from, probably not from US because that would be too early for those participants, but from Europe and from Middle East and maybe also from Asia. So it's I'm very happy to meet you over in cyberspace, so to speak. And I'm looking forward to receive your questions and to respond to those. But to start with, Alexandra and myself, we have agreed that I make some short comments in addition to what came out from the different chapters that are under this module, water and agriculture, or water, food and agriculture. So we have the four chapters, one on green, blue water, gray water, one on what I call field to fork, and one on the inconvenient legacy, that's on the small scale farmers, their fate and the possibilities. And the final chapter is on nature-based solutions or approaches. So I would like to start by providing you with some comments in addition to what you have heard on those chapters. And let me start with the first chapter on green, blue and gray water. And my colleague from Jordan, Professor Sama Tolasi, he makes a very important distinction between green and blue water when he says that in order to utilize the blue water, and by blue water we are talking about the water in rivers and lakes or in reservoirs and also groundwater. And he said to utilize the green water we need energy. We need energy to pump water and we need energy to convey water, to transport water from one place to another. And that is very different from what we call the green water, because green water is the rainwater that has infiltrated into the soil, and green water is the same then as soil moisture. And that is, of course, true. But I would like to add a few points here. One is that we also need energy to make use of the gray water, or the wastewater. So water after it has been used in industry and also in agriculture and other sectors, because it contains some of the deleterious substances, or it may contain, and we need to pump that water back to the field, to the farmers, or to industry or something like that. So in that sense, there's no difference between the blue water and the gray water. Both need energy. But I think it's also, there are some more issues that we need to be clear about. One is that in the same way that we distinguish between different kinds of water, the green, the blue, and the gray, we also need to distinguish between different types of energy. For some of the pumping, farmers may use diesel or electric pumps, but it's also very important to be clear that there is an increasing potential to use wind, solar power, and such non-fossil fuel sources. So there is a potential now to use those kind of energy without, shall we say, adding to the greenhouse gas emissions, but also to transfer and to treat water. I think it's also important to note that farmers who rely on green water, the soil moisture, it's a very risky business. And for those of you who live in semi-arid regions, maybe in the Middle East or in other parts of the world, you know that rainfall is very unreliable. And it may rain in one village, but not in the next village. So for farmers who fully depend on the green water, they face big risks from one season to another. They might have they might face a loss in harvest or a reduction in the crop. So I think for those farmers who are able to make some kind of supplementary irrigation, either through some small scale windmill or something like that, to lift some water from the ground, it is a kind of insurance for them that they could increase or secure a crop. And they might also be able to grow other crops. And if they only rely on green water or rain-fed agriculture, they usually have to rely on very limited amounts of different types of crops. And in that connection, I like to give you a reference to a very nice movie that was just released. It's a movie from a nice story from Malawi in East Africa. And the title of that movie is The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. You can find it on Netflix or probably some, maybe on the screens or other screens. But it's a good illustration of the potential to use simple technologies in the village. In this case, they have a small windmill and they can lift water for additional crop security. So that is a very important combination, I think. There's one more aspect to the, shall we say, the energy water connection, and that is for farmers who rely only on green water to infiltrate the local rainfall. They usually have to spend quite a lot of effort to dig small pits or to build small barriers in the country, in the land, in order to stop or to reduce the surface flow of water. So even though they might not use energy from electricity or from fossil fuels or something like that, they have to spend a lot of human energy. And so there is in both the blue and the green water, we have to use different types of energy, either human energy in terms that is probably the best solution for many farmers in areas with uncertain rainfall.
Jan, sorry to
Yes?
interrupt. I think the last part of your talk was, I don't know, the screen froze up or something. So I think we missed what the final part of that.
You missed it, huh? Okay.
Yeah, the screen froze, so I couldn't hear anything. And
okay.
I assume it was so for everybody else.
Oh, so shall I repeat that one? Yes.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So my point here is that it's very important if you look on the livelihood of farmers, the possibilities of farmers to make a decent livelihood. It is good to combine different types of water, different types of the water resource, both the rainfall, of course, when it's possible, but then also to have some kind of supplementary irrigation. That could be by very simple type of technologies, and it could be by driven by non-fossil fuels like wind power or solar power or something like that. So it's important to not to say that we only have green water and only have blue water, but we usually have a combination. We should think about the combination of different types of water for the best option for farmers. A second point that I would like to add is that in the presentation by Olja Unver, that was on the nature-based solution, he is making the point that we need to have both an intensification and a diversification of agriculture. And I agree with that. It's important to have an improved productivity. We need to produce more food, and we need to increase the water productivity to produce more crop per drop, as it were. But I would like to stress that diversification is probably the most important aspect. that we should give the farmers the opportunity to diversify production. Because in large part of the world, in Africa particularly, but also in Asian countries, there's been a tendency that farmers concentrate on one crop, what we call monocropping. And diversification is very important for them to make better use of the water. If you only have one type of crop, it means that you have to use the water in a specific period of the season. But if you have different crops, you can use water in the early part of the season or late part of the season. So diversification is extremely important, I think. And it's also true that if you look on the demand side, we have a growing number of people living in urban centers, and they are demanding different types of food. So from a marketing possibility, the farmers have an opportunity to sell different types of crops. So there's a kind of win-win situation, both on the production side as well as in terms of income and marketing of the items. So I think the last point is that it is important for the farmers we provide incentives for the farmers to increase or improve their livelihoods, to make better use of the water in terms of producing more crop per drop, but also different crops per drop. And also to be able to market the crop, to bring it to the market in cities or in urban centers. That is extremely important, because if they don't have transport, if they don't have storage, what can the farmers do? They must be having those kind of opportunities, both production as well as then the opportunities to sell or to market the goods that they have been producing. So I think these are my comments as a kind of supplement to the input or the contents of the different chapters that you have been watching.
Thank you so much, Jan. That was excellent. All right, so let's move on to the questions then. We can start with the first question from Karine. What do you think about the use of human waste in agriculture to protect groundwater?
Yes, hello, Karine. By human waste, I suppose you're talking about urine and feces, aren't you?
I don't think she can answer that.
Okay, no. Anyway, I think that to use the human waste is important. It's also human waste maybe from households in terms of, should we say, the leftovers of food and different types of organic matter that you have in the household. Those kind of, let's say, waste products could also be a resource. And if you can use those for soil amelioration to improve the quality of the soil, and many of those waste products, they also have a good contents of nutrients, of phosphorus, of nitrogen. So I think it's primarily important in terms of improving the soil fertility to maybe make it easier for the farmers to grow different kinds of crops. But your question is about how this could be used to protect groundwater, and I don't think it has much to do with groundwater. So the use of human waste is primarily, as I see it, a means to increase or improve the fertility of the soil. And that means that you could improve the cropping intensity or to get bigger harvests.
Thank you so much, Jan. I hope that answered her question and that we understood it correctly. Moving on, next question comes from Mona. Did Food and Agriculture Organization or CB promote any cooperation-oriented projects or programs for small farmers to profit from their agriculture production? Like we in business, we promote SME so we could reach Waterwise World. Comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I think we have some collaboration with FAO, but also with other organizations to promote what we call an improved productivity. and especially maybe among smallholders in Africa. Because if we look upon the situation, the agriculture situation in Africa, most of especially the small farmers, medium farmers perhaps also, they have a very low productivity. On average, the amount of crop or the yield per hectare is in the order of 1.5 tons. And that is quite a low productivity, a low yield, which means also low income, and it also part of the food insecurity type of problem. And we've seen, I think, in many parts of Africa that there is a huge potential to increase, to give a boost to productivity by having a little bit better of water management. What I talked about before, maybe to combine different type of green and blue water management inputs. But it's also very important to have a combination between water and fertilizers, better seeds, modern seed varieties. And there are studies which show that farmers, they tend to use the fertilizers, improved seeds, and water management in different fields. So there is a surprisingly lack of coordination of the modern inputs in the same field. So I think that that's one part of the points that we are discussing, to promote a better coordination of water management, use of modern seeds, high-yielding varieties, and fertilizers in the same fields. And we are also, I think it's very important to not only talk about food insecurity or food problems, but the nutritional aspects. So what we are discussing now is to try to promote a type of agriculture where farmers are stimulated to grow more nutritious crops. And that means fruits, vegetables, and those kind of crops, which are good from a micronutrient perspective, and they're also good from different types of other nutrients. So these two aspects we are working on and trying to see how performance can be improved.
Thank you so much. So moving on, next question from Chen. From customers' perspective, should we buy less non-local produced food? Will it have a negative economic impact on agriculture export countries?
Which question is? Sorry, who was the person pointing that question?
Chen.
Chen, sorry. From a customer, should we buy less of non-local produced food? Well, if you say we, I don't know if you mean we as citizens in Sweden, or maybe you are in, I don't know if you are in China, wherever you are, but I think it's good to buy as much as possible of locally produced food. And that means also that we, to the extent possible, we should buy food that are produced in the season. So if I take Sweden as an example, I mean, we are producing some types of food that are available during the summer, and other crops or other food are available throughout the year. So I think that it's both a combination of local and seasonal crops that are important from a resource point of view, and also that if you buy locally produced food, that means also that we are reducing the transport, and that means that we're saving energy, and of course, I think also there is a good possibility to support the connection between urban systems and agriculture or farmers if you buy local food. We see in Sweden that we have an increasing demand for food that are marketed by the farmers themselves for a local market. So I think most consumers are very positive, keen on trying to buy more of locally produced food, because then they know where the food is coming from. If you buy food that is produced elsewhere, outside your own country, outside your own region, you don't know how it is produced, you don't know how the farmers are treating the cows or the what kind of inputs they use in cropping and such things. So I think there are many advantages by using or by buying, demanding more of locally produced food.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one way to combat this and also to be more sustainable in our ways. Yeah, so moving on, a next question from Nidhi. Is it possible to move from water-intensive crops like rice to drought-resistant foods like millets? And how to do it? Millet are indigenous to India, however, its demand is low, so it is expensive. You want to answer that, Jan?
Yeah, I like that question. That's a very important issue also. And I mean, crops like rice and also maize, they were introduced on a large scale in connection with the so-called Green Revolution in the 1960s and onwards. And as you say, in India, they have become quite widespread. And they are also then connected to large-scale irrigation, usually, or irrigation, of course, because they require a lot of water. And there are attempts in India. You might be aware of the work that is done by Ecological in Hyderabad, where they're trying to promote millets and sorghum. Because the crops like millets and sorghum, they used to be major crops before the rice. So in the 1950s and earlier, millets and sorghum were quite common crops, and they were important components in the diet. But then when the rice was introduced with huge subsidies, there was subsidies both in terms of water provision and other types of subsidies. It became unprofitable for the farmers to continue with the sorghum and millets because there was no one who wanted to buy them. So you say that it's expensive. I think rather that the crops like millets and sorghum, they are to a very small extent marketed because the farmers are not able to get a decent price for them. So while they can sell rice and other crops that are grown in irrigated systems. But I think what they're doing in India is to try to promote millets, for instance, through school programs. So the government of India has recommended that all schools in India, I'm not sure which level of schools, but ordinary schools, they are recommended to introduce millets on the midday meal. So that means if the teachers, if those who are responsible for the school system, if they will introduce meals and to give to the children and include millets in the meals, it could give a big boost to the cultivation and to the marketing of millets. So I think there must be some support from governments or from, in this case, also the school system, to give a boost, to give a push for the cultivation and the marketing of those crops, which are more important from a nutritional point of view. But as it is now, they are in low demand. It's difficult for the farmers to sell
them. Yes, thank you for that. Moving on to the next question. From Tapos. I think there's a need to make people aware about this issue and easy access to information on the issue of food production and food security and nature-based solution in the sustainable intensification. What do you think about people, in this case farmers, awareness about this issue? So is it high, low, average?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the question, but I think that, I mean, if you look upon the farmers are of course aware of they have problems with the water, they have problems to do different types of farming activities, and they have problems to sell whatever they are producing. They think they are cheated by traders or by marketing agents. So I think that the farmers, especially small farmers, they are very much aware of the water situation. They know that they have problems if the rains will fail. But I think we have maybe a bigger problem among the consumers, because most of the consumers who are growing up in urban centers, who are growing up far away from the farms, they don't know about the hard work that the farmers are putting into food production, and they usually demand food that is cheap and that they of course which they like. So there is and most, I think, consumers are not aware of the huge amount of water that is required to produce the food. I mean, if we are drinking maybe a few liters of water per day, but the amount of water that is required to produce the food is to be calculated in tons. And I think most consumers are not aware of the fact that there's so much of water that is going into food production, and that means that we are not generally willing to pay for the actual cost of producing the food. Are you, Jesper, sorry, Tapos, are you on the line?
I think they are just writing their questions.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, can we move on to the next question?
Yeah, but can I add one thing? I think that you talk about food production and food security. I think it's important also to talk about the nutrition security, because if you look upon the food situation in the world today, the farmers are producing much more food as compared to what we need to eat. So we have a huge problem in the world today with a loss and the waste of the food that is produced due to poor storage, due to poor transport. And the consumers, they're also throwing away a large part of the food that we are buying or otherwise procuring. And finally, there's also a huge problem in the world today with people are overeating. We eat too much. So we have a much bigger problem in the world today with people being overweight, obese, and who are suffering from micronutrients as compared to the number of people who are eating too little. So there is a kind of unbalance in the food system with severe inefficiency in the supply chain from production over to the consumers. I think that is a huge issue in the world today.
Thank you so much, Jan. Moving on, the next question comes from Jesper. How can public-private sustainable development goals oriented partnerships such as P4G reach benefit and support these small farming communities and make a difference? What's a good business case?
Yeah, that's also a very timely question, I think, because the farmers, they do, of course, they rely on somebody to buy the food from them, to transport it, to process it. I mean, consumers in urban centers, they demand not only fresh produce, but they demand frozen products, processed food in different types. And for that, they need, of course, some kind of relationship or partnership with business community or with the food industry. And at the same time, food industry, the big food industry like Nestlé, Unilever, and other big food companies, they do, of course, depend on a number of farmers who are producing commodities which they can buy. So I think there's a mutual kind of linkage between farmers who are producing the commodities, the food industry who are involved in processing and different types of value-added type of activities, and of course different the shops, the wholesalers, and so on. And we have had some contacts with different food companies at CV, with the biggest food companies, Nestlé, for instance, but also Unilever is a big actor, and I think that the general perception among the food industry people is that they they need a good partnership with farmers. I mean, a company like Nestle has about or depend on the inputs from about 700,000 farmers worldwide. So there is a mutual kind of dependence between the farmers and the food industry. But then we have quite a large number of small-scale food industry in Asia, in Africa, and I think the difference between the small-scale industry in the food sector is that it's very difficult to control the, shall we say, quality aspects of small-scale food industry. The big food industry, they are very cautious about their reputation, of course, and their brand, whereas the small-scale food industry are much more, well, they would act locally, perhaps. They don't have the same resources to secure safe food and such things. So there is a tricky issue. How do you ensure that the small-scale food industry are also ensuring that the food that they are producing is safe and good for the consumers?
Thank you so much, Jan. I think that was a very good answer to the question. So moving on, next question comes from Yakta. What do you think about the comparisons between small and big farms in terms of their ecological effects? The EU regulation generally incite big-size farms in terms of management.
Yeah, the big farms, I think it's difficult to generalize that, but big farms, they tend to be associated with monocropping. I mean, big farms, they have, as the name suggests, they have very big fields and they grow, let's say, one or a couple of crops. And they have a very high degree of mechanization, different types of inputs also in terms of chemical components, chemical substances. So the big farms, I think, from an ecological point of view, are it's difficult to generalize, but I think many of them are not the best examples for being good from an ecological point of view, from a resource, from a diversification point of view. But at the same time, they are more, should we say, they use sophisticated technologies, management practice. They have different types of equipment to control water, soil moisture, so they can be very efficient in terms of how they utilize, for instance, water, but also other types of inputs like fertilizers and such things. So, whereas the small farmers, they have a tradition to be more diversified because they depend on different types of food for themselves. And there's a tradition generally among small farmers to be more, should we say, related to ecological conditions in the area where they are working the land. So, but at the same time, the small farmers, they have the productivity or the output, the yields are very low. So there is a kind of difficulty to make a good living for the small farmers. And then we see for a large part of the world, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, there's a huge outflow of young people from small farm holdings. So the young generation, they are a bit reluctant to take over and run the small-scale farms. So there is a big problem to ensure that we have a good functioning small-scale or medium-scale farming system also in the future, because if you cannot improve the productivity, if you cannot improve livelihood, it's very difficult to motivate people to stay behind and to take over the farms from their fathers or from the previous generation.
Thanks so much, Jan. Moving on, next question. Very interesting question from our audience. So next question comes from somebody with the same name as you, Jan. Food waste is a global challenge, and as we are starting to measure it, the need of agreed and common key performance indicators become obvious. What different key performance indicators have you seen used?
Well, yes, this is close to my heart, the food waste. We usually distinguish between food losses and waste. And in my terminology, food waste is the throwing away or discarding food that is fit for eating. I mean, if a household, if a family buys 4 packages of food, they might eat 2 or 3, and then they throw away the third and the fourth package. So the most, I think, common figures for giving an estimate on the amount of food that is lost and wasted. In my terminology, food loss is the losses which are due to poor transport, poor storage, and something more technical aspects, whereas waste is the human dimension, so to speak, that we are throwing away the food. I think that the key performance indicators, I'm not quite sure how to respond to that, but as you indicate, we have a rather poor statistical information about how much food people are actually wasting. And in my view, I think we should also include overeating as a kind of food waste. Because if a family, if a person buys a certain amount of food, he or she or they could eat all of it, and then it's usually overeating, or we could eat some of it and throw away some of it, and then it's food waste. But from a water point of view or from a resource point of view, there's no difference between eating all the food that we are buying, which is usually too much, or to eat some and throwing away some. So for me, food waste is both the deliberate or the unconscious throwing away of food, as well as that we eat too much. But then there is also, we don't have very good statistical information about how much food people are eating, because it's a very difficult statistical challenge to measure the amount of food that people are putting into our mouth. So I think we would be well served by having better information about better studies on the amount of food that people are actually eating. Because what we are not eating, or if we're eating too much, I think then we can get a better understanding of the food waste problematic.
Absolutely, very good points. So moving on, next question from Edina. How can public-private partnerships influence the government institutions to enhance efficiency and improve productivity within the environmental limits?
Yeah, I think it's public-private. I would also like to add that it's public not only in terms of public institutions, schools, hospitals, such things, but the public, I would say, would also include consumers. And I think consumers, they have a very important influence in terms of what the farmers can sell and what is demanded. So, but the example I took earlier from the school system in India, where the government is trying to, is recommended the schools to serve midday meals based on millets and sorghum. It comes down to to what extent the school children will actually like the millets and the sorghum meals. So if we can improve if we can change or stimulate consumers to demand food items that are, should we say, water efficient, that are good from a nutritional point of view, then we have a very good, I think, strategy. So it's a combination, I think, between the public institutions, so the government, the school system, hospitals, military establishment, as well as the consumers themselves. So there is a need to, I think, to stimulate the consumers to demand more of nutritious food, food that is low in water consumption, and that have, should we say, a low also greenhouse gas emission. So it's a combination between different types of institutions, I think.
Thank you so much for that, John. Okay, so moving on, next question comes from Hamadi. How to take into account of virtual water trade in food production in water scarce regions such as Tunisia?
Yeah, the notion of, or the concept of virtual water trade is the trade in food, and it is of course true that water scarce countries like Tunisia, it would make sense that they would not import items that are requiring a lot of water. And I don't know the case of Tunisia, but we have a rather paradoxical situation in the world where countries that have very little water or limited water amounts, they are producing food items, but also other items like sugarcane or water consuming items like cotton, and exporting them to water-rich countries as well. So that is I think that comes in connection with the kind of trade problematic, and of course the water poor countries, they need also to export different commodities, to earn foreign exchange and such things, but from a water point of view, it is a strange situation, I would say.
Thank you so much. Moving on then, next question. So from Fabian, considering urban cities will be home to more of 60% of global population by 2050, is there a big potential for urban agriculture to feed the urban consumers?
Yeah, I think it's urban agriculture, or agriculture in areas close by to the urban centers. It will become increasingly difficult for farmers who are living far away from the cities to compete with farmers who are living close by to the urban centers. So there is, I think, the distance to urban centers will become important. It's important from a competitive point of view. So there is obviously a big potential for farmers who are living close by to urban centers to reach the urban markets quickly, and to do it with relatively low costs. And in particular, I think that there are some food items like vegetables, fruits, and such things which are very sensitive to transport. So I think for those kind of food items that are in increasing demand in urban centers, they will probably be much more easy to produce close by to the cities. Whereas the food items which can be produced in bulk quantities, like rice, like different kind of cereals, rice, wheat, and such crops, they probably are too bulky to produce in urban areas. So there will be a distinction in terms of what kind of crops that can be produced profitably close by to the cities, and then also in terms of the vulnerability of crops that will favor some crops nearby the urban centers.
Thank you so much for that. I think that answered the question. So next question comes from Musa. Groundwater salinization is a great issue in agriculture and crop production. How do we establish a model in order to better manage fresh water linked to saline water?
Well, I think this is outside my competence, so I cannot. I am not able to give a proper response to this. I know it's a big issue, and it's not only the salinization of the groundwater, but it's also salinization of soils. I mean, if you take a country like Egypt, a large part of the Nile Valley, the farmers are facing an increasing problem with the salinization of the soils. So it's salinization will affect both the water source, groundwater source, as well as the soil. And how to deal with that is a tricky issue.
Thank you for that, John. I mean, sometimes we don't have the answers, right? And we have to admit.
No, yes, or you better we better refrain from giving an answer.
Yeah. So I think this. I'm not sure if you can answer this question because it comes from Salma. She's saying, I'm thinking of the river basin organizations and the effect on food in the different states. What are the effects? I know this is a general question, but I need some hints in its management. So I don't know if this is your expertise, but you want to give a stab at it?
Yeah, yes, as you say, Alexandra, this is outside my expertise, but I think that my comment to that would be that river basin organizations, I mean, they are based on as the word says, river basins. It's a kind of fiscal unit, whereas so let's see here. So what they are producing, I mean, the trade and the transport and such things is not following the river basin boundaries. So they will produce food or whatever commodities, cotton, whatever they are producing, and sell it to urban centers. And the urban center might be outside the river basin. So I think river basin organizations are mainly in order to make better use of the water resources in the basin. Not for the marketing, not for the export or something like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So moving on, and also I want to advise all our students that if you have questions, many of your fellow students or learners are experts within the water sector in different aspects. So just write your questions in the discussion forums, and I'm sure people will answer that. We have professors and other experts in the course, so engage with each other. That's an advice from me. Moving on. Next question from Suleiman. Unregulated use of pesticides and herbicides are a major source of non-point pollution from agricultural runoff, especially in developing countries. What can be done to ameliorate that?
Yeah, that's a huge issue, and that's part of the water pollution, of course, and many of those are toxic, of course, and if you have them in high concentrations, they will be extremely dangerous. And the only thing I think, I mean, some of them come with, shall I say, modern or intensified agriculture that people want to produce higher crops or more crops, and then they're using both pesticides, herbicides together with other seeds. And it's up to agencies and the countries to try to control, to get rid of those pesticides that are, I mean, we have many pesticides that are forbidden, but that are not supposed to be used, but they're still being used in different countries. So it's a part of the regulation or regulatory authorities to try to impose those kind of rules and regulations that are available to reduce the use of those and to maybe to stimulate pesticides and different chemicals that are less toxic. But it's of course both a price problem and distribution problem. So But it's a huge problem, and this will usually then be, of course, more. There will be an accumulation of these toxic substances downstream so they will come out into the coastal zone and create big problems in areas far away from where they are being used.
Thanks so much, Jan. Okay, so next question comes from Abraham. What is the future of countries with limited resources, since food is hard to grow and even more difficult to preserve and prepare in the absence of abundant water?
Yeah, this is of course, if you also combine it with the information that we have a rapid population increase in many of the countries where we have limited water resources. So this is a problem that will become increasingly challenging. And I think, for some of those countries, there is a possibility there's a demand to diversify the economy. So it will be difficult for some of those countries, I think, to rely completely on food that is produced internally or nationally. We talked, a previous question was about the virtual water trade. I think for some of the countries with a high population growth, limited water resources, it will be extremely difficult to rely on a food security that is based on only local production. They have to find some kind of economic activities to earn foreign exchange, to import food from other countries. So that I think many countries cannot depend completely on their own food production in the future.
Thank you so much, Jan. Okay, so we're nearing the end of our session, so I think we will just have time for maybe one or two more questions. Yes, a question from Wellington on waste. Though it has a direct impact on water, transport, etc., the challenge can be addressed using the water, energy, and food mixes, where waste can generate energy and organic fertilizers, leaving no direct waste. With the trust being on production of organic food, which is considered to be healthy, isn't this going to affect more water resources?
Yeah, the nexus, or the combining water, energy, and food, yes, that is of course I started to mention that we have to look upon the combination of the blue and green water and wastewater, in the sense that there are different types of energy that is required to produce, to make use of the water. So and many of the waste products that we have, both in households as well as in industry and in society at large, many of those waste products, they contain nutrients, they contain different types of components that are important from a soil amelioration point of view. So this is part of an attempt to, I think, create a kind of recirculation of the important components that are included in the waste products. And I think we have created a society, we have created a kind of agriculture where we are not making enough of reuse of the waste products that are available in society. So that is important, yes.
Thank you so much, Jan. Okay, so we have another question from Fabian, actually. Do you agree that market-based systems, water waste and removing agriculture subsidies, that this can help to enhance efficiency in water consumption, especially in agriculture that accounts for 70% of global use?
Yeah, I mean, water rates, we usually say that people should not pay for water, but they should be prepared to pay for the water services. So if there's an agency, if there's a water company or a ministry, whatever it is, that invests in water, in either dams or in treatment plants or in distribution system, it is connected to it with a big cost. And it is reasonable, I think, that the farmers and the users of the water, it's not only farmers, but somebody must pay those, must cover those costs. And we know also that the water use among some farmers is not very efficient. And of course, if the water is free, if they don't pay for the water, and if they don't pay for the electricity to pump the water, then there is not very much incentives to economize with the use of water. So I think it's reasonable to argue that the different costs that are included in the production of water services or to the generation of water services, that the farmers should contribute to those to cover those costs, and in order to improve the shall we say the worthwhile use of the water, the best possible use of the water.
Okay, thank you so much, Jan. I think we can have just one final question, and
Okay.
this is actually from me. So, nature-based solutions for agriculture seems like they are one of the best ways forward. But would you say that they are sustainable at a large-scale production? It seems that anytime something is large-scale or mass-produced, it has a negative impact on the environment and it is not sustainable. So would you say that nature-based solutions for agriculture is possible for large-scale production?
I think it's more difficult in large-scale production because of there is, as I mentioned before, there's usually a connection between large-scale production and monoculture. And of course, the large-scale production, it's also usually very commercialized. So the economic thinking is very obvious if you take the commercial big farms, for instance. So there is I think, a contradiction between those kind of farms or those kind of farming systems and the nature-based solutions. So in general, the nature-based solutions, they would work, I think, better in connection with small-scale, medium-scale farms, where the farmers tend to have a much better sense for the ecological conditions in the area and also the opportunities in the area. There is from I think historical examples, but also currently, the farmers who are running a small farm, they can see the opportunities to make use of different parts of the farm, for instance, for different crops. And they are better, I think, they have better knowledge to diversify and to be in harmony with the different possibilities that nature provides.
Thank you so much for answering my question. Okay, I think we have to wrap up now. So do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I have many thoughts during this session, but I think that the one general point is that we must think more in terms of farm or food systems. We have to think about the connection between the farmers and the growing markets in urban centers and outside the farm. So because we have an urbanizing world, more and more people are living in urban centers and they need food, of course. So the future for farmers and the future for farming is to be part of this interaction between the producers and the markets and the consumers who are needing and who are demanding the food. So that is, I think, generally food agriculture has been thought about separate from shall we say, the consumers, the needs of the consumers, and nutrition aspects and such things. So these are some general comments.
Okay, thank you so much, Jan, for taking the time to join us. And I think we have to wrap up now. So again, thank you so much, Jan. And I just want to say to all our audience, thank you for taking the time to also participate and ask your questions. And next week is our final webinar for for the final module, Water and Energy Nexus, and it will be on Wednesday, March 13 at 1 p.m. UTC, so 3 hours after the time of this one. And it is with Dr. Nathaniel Matthews. So yes, thank you all for joining, and have a good morning, afternoon, or day, night, wherever you are in the world. So thank you again, Jan, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you for listening to wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much.